Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. If you've never been here before, well, thank you for giving it a chance. This is a cozy corner of the internet for narrative, for people who love stories. And what we do here on Tuesday nights is we read old folklore and fairy tales. And it is November, that's true. So you might be wondering, why is the Halloween stuff still up? And that is because, for various scheduling reasons, I wasn't able to get to this particular topic this year, but I didn't want to stow it away for an entire year before I came back to it. So this is like a bonus Hallowstream, and I'm going to say a bit more on that, but let me just say something off the top. Probably already noticed it. There is a live chat going. There are already some people in there and they're enjoying themselves. But in case you're the kind of person who doesn't look at a pinned comment, there is one rule today. It's my first for the chat, and that is this. I want my streams to be a respite for people. We all know that today is a significant day for Americans, and we will not be discussing that here at all. That's the rule. Let people think about just folklore for an hour or two. I will be timing out users that persist in discussing that topic. You get like one warning, maybe. But to be clear, that timing out is not out of any resentment. I just want this stream to be a peaceful ground for anxious people. Thank you. Lizzie Rose says, I still love this creepy music. Where'd you find it, Rory? Does it have a name? All my music comes from Epidemic Sound, which is like a sound service where you pay a monthly fee and you put in your YouTube account and you can use it on there as actually licensed music. Because what can happen with royalty-free music is suddenly the person changes their mind, which they have the right to do under the law. And so you can put a bunch of songs in a stream and they change their mind, and then suddenly you have to either take the stream down or redo it or something like that. So these are all songs that I'm licensed to use. Specifically, the music that you're hearing right now is from an artist called Jay Varton, Varton. This is, all of these songs actually are from an album called Phantasm. I forget which song is in my intro, but I think it's also a Jay Varton song. I'm glad to hear that you're healing a bit, Tammy, and Jumpstore says, I just want to escape into the soothing sounds of Rory's sweet, sweet stories. Well, on that topic, they're not so sweet tonight. Let's talk about that next. I said I wanted this place to be a peaceful ground for anxious people. Now allow me to pollute this peaceful ground with the most gruesome and horrible collection of folktales I've yet assembled for a stream. This is not me being dramatic. This is me trying to prepare you so you can decide if this stream is for you. I cannot emphasize enough how much of a content warning I am putting on this. This is not, when I say cannibals, this is not Grimm Brothers implying an old witch wants to eat children. These are frankly mostly about child killing of some sort, usually a person's own child, and often being consumed against their will. It's horrible. One of the stories in this collection was dubbed by its own collector as an abominable and repulsive tale, which fortunately subsequently disappears again for good, and that last point is because they chose to preclude it from their own published collection, which was Asbjørnsen and Moe's collection. So why am I reading these joyless and grim tales? Then, well, we have German, Scottish, Norwegian, and Breton tales here, and that's just because those are the main regions of folklore I've explored. What I'm trying to say is pretty much every culture has some cycle of cannibal lore, and that speaks obviously to a human fascination with such a hideous topic. And where there is fascination, so goes storytellers to explore them. So here we go. And for the love of God, don't say I didn't warn you. This ain't for kids, and it's not even for most adults. Give me a second here. Tonight's first horrible story is called The Child Eater, and it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is a collection of recently translated, this one was translated like this week, recently translated folklore from Jürgen Hubert, who, when the stream is no longer live, will have a pinned comment below where you can support him on his Patreon. You guys aren't ready for this. In the year 1638, after the birth of our Savior, famine began a terrible scourge in our dear Altmark, in the city of Steinde. As spring had arrived late, between Easter and Pentecost, neither rye nor wheat stalks had reached a height which would have allowed even a crow to hide within it. Furthermore, a great number of mice arrived which dug through the soil and gnawed and devoured the roots of the plants so that the fields were only scarcely covered with ears of grain. During the time of the harvest, the clouds rained almost every day, and a large part of the blessings of God was already spoiled while still on the fields. And whatever was brought into the barns was so little that the people witnessing this sighed like once Jacob and his sons did in Canaan. And they spoke, "How shall we fare when the dear winter arrives in this land?" Furthermore, precious little fruits could be gathered from the trees, as the caterpillars had previously nourished themselves on the leaves with relish. And cabbage and other vegetables had been perforated by the horrible vermin, as if they were sieves. Finally, whatever was left on the fields and meadows that could still their hunger was trampled upon by steeds and men, thanks to war. When winter now arrived with snow and ice, the poor people whimpered because of the cold. Because they had little on their bodies and less within them. However, the elders consoled themselves with the word of God from the Bible and the hymn book and spoke, "Don't despair! What our God has created, he intends to preserve. And since he nourishes the young ravens who call out to him, he'll surely not ignore your prayers." But the small children, who did not yet know what is left and what is right, and who thought that the bread came from father and mother, acted in a particularly pitiful manner. And often they screamed loudly because of their hunger and shouted again and again, "Dear parents, don't let us starve." Now, it occurred that a man lived in Steindl, who during this time was a soldier, who killed many an enemy in cold blood during the battles of the 30 Years' War, raging at the time. He'd been injured and was lying in his hut. His wife and housekeeper cared for him so diligently that he recovered with the help of God and the barber surgeon. I'm sure most people know this, but if you don't, barbers were often also medical providers because they had the tools. But his strength could not and would not return, as they were lacking in bread, and the poor woman, like the widow of Zarephath, often barely had a handful of flour in her storage. As the servant of war was eager to return to the fray of battle, this made him irritated and sullen, and he particularly loathed the constant whining of his children and their non-stop cries for bread. One day, when his spouse was busy in the house, and the youngest children were still lying in the deepest slumber where they were able to forget their dire straits, and perhaps dreamed of a beautiful meal which would satiate them, one day the oldest of the children, who had already risen and was a boy of 6 years and was wild and brave like his father, boldly stepped before the latter and spoke, "You are a pitiful excuse for a father. Since you're not even able to give me and my brothers and sisters bread, Father, get us something to eat." The boy said this in all innocence, and since he had not yet learned the fourth commandment, such a bizarre detail to add here for what's coming. Neither did the little soul know that dear God had made the grain prices rise. But the father grew enraged at such a speech, grabbed his saber in anger, and killed the boy with one blow. And then he cut open the body of the murdered boy, took out his lungs and liver, and forced his mother, who nearly suffocated from her weeping, to cook and fry both of these for him, as he was nearly dying from hunger. She did so because she had to, fearing the anger and wrath of her husband. And he greedily devoured the entrails of his own son. But he fared badly with his horrible meal, and the punishment of heaven was imminent. The angel of God struck him so that he staggered around as if mad, and in his entrails there was an ache which tormented him as if glowing tongs pinched him, and then he screamed and accused himself of being his murder of his own child, cursed himself, and then suddenly sank to the ground like Ananias and Sapphira did, and his black soul fled. Then the executioners came, took his corpse, and buried him where the worst criminals are buried. How the poor widow and her still living wards fared after this, the legend does not tell. But we may believe that God, who is the father of widows and the orphans, took care of them and saved them all from their sad fate. I feel like that's the author being like, no, don't worry, it's fine. They certainly obviously didn't also starve to death after the worst thing in their life happened. That really gives you a good feeling about what these stories are like. To answer your question, Lizzie Rose, when I said they weren't consenting, I mean the people eating it were rarely consenting to the eating of it in these stories, which somehow makes it worse. Oh, Janera's here. Hello. Hi, Janera. I feel the need to thus repeat my content warning that these are the most grim and horrible stories I've ever collected. Genuinely disgusting and horrible. So, you know, protect yourself if you need to. Also, we have a no political discussion rule today. Not that that's ever a thing that really happens much here, but just in case. Whew. I will say that's one of the worst ones, but I don't know if it's the worst one. They're all pretty bad. Gennaro says I clearly missed something. No, you didn't. You didn't. I just sort of anticipated that would be on Americans' minds. And it's not really what the stream's for. Okay. Let's keep this moving. We actually have quite a few stories, and none of them are very short to get through, so I'm going to keep cooking. Our next horrible story about disgusting meals is called The Bandits of the Eckernkrug in the Schimmerwald forest. And it also comes to us from Jürgen Hubert. It is also very recently translated by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support by clicking in the pinned comment below, where you can see his Patreon Sunken Castles Evil Poodles. Jumpstore says, always nice to have a long stream, Rory. I'm here for it. That's good. That's good. I just hope nobody needs to eat dinner during this. The Schimmerwald forest between Hatzborg and Ilsenborg was infamous for the bandits who dwelled within it. An old woman lived at Selbach in Klostei, and whose daughter was ancient but still alive in this city in the year 1850. according to an old woman from Lurbach. Once was caught by surprise by the night within the Schimmerwald, and sought a place to stay in the Eckernkrug Tavern. There she slept, on the floor in the main chamber. But in the night, many bandits arrived who had brought a fat man as a prisoner with them. They cut up his meat and made a sausage out of him. But before they did so, they held a light above this old woman down on the floor, even tickled the soles of her feet in order to see if she was really fast asleep. If she had moved in the slightest manner, she would have been murdered as well. However, she withstood all tests and nevertheless saw clearly what was happening. The next morning, the bandits said that they had butchered a pig in the night and asked if she hadn't heard anything. The woman replied that she had not heard anything and that she had never slept as well in her life before, and looked at them in a friendly manner. And then the bandits put sausage soup in front of her, and the old woman from Zelbach ate the sausage soup and praised it. If she had shown only the slightest disgust, she would have had to die. Then the bandits brought a fresh sausage to her. She wrapped a piece of cloth around it, said that she wanted to bring it to her children, and thanked them many, many times for it. In this manner, the bandits let her go on her way. However, when she traveled for some time through the forest, two men stepped forward towards her whom she did not know, and asked her where she'd spent the night. As she said, in the Eckernkrug, they started to disparage its inhabitants and claimed that nothing good was spoken of them. The old one said that no one could please everyone, and wagging tongues were laying in ambush for even the best of them. She'd rarely been to more benevolent people than the ones in Eckernkrug. As proof, she showed the sausage which she'd been given there, and if she had not done so, she would have died after all, for those men were also a part of the band of robbers. They now left her, but after a while, two further men stepped before her once more, and they again denigrated the people of Eckernkrug. Straight up said that they had heard that they were bandits. And then the woman showed her sausage again, and said that such good people could not be found twice on God's whole earth. If she had not said that, she would have had to die even now, for these men too were of the bandits. As soon as the old woman was out of the forest without further harm, she ran to the next town as fast as she could, and there she revealed everything she had seen to the authorities, and the bandits were immediately captured. And when they were lying in a chamber, bound at their hands and feet, the old mother was led to them and testified that she had seen all these people go into and out of Eckernkrug that night, and how they had butchered the fat man. But the bandits frothed with rage, as this old woman, whose life they had only spared after so many trials and who had tricked them in the end, and was now walking around them, healthily and hale. Yeah, Tammy says you must have a strong upchuck reflex. I wouldn't say, I don't know, something about these stories definitely makes the idea of like somebody forcing you to eat human meat is definitely one that sticks with me. I wouldn't say I have like the most squeamish person, but this one, these stories get to me for sure. Now this one is this conceit of a sausage made by bandits that can't be trusted as human meat and stuff is one we will see again. It's actually reasonably common. I kind of just picked two of them. And I think it comes from, frankly, a universal and timeless distrust of sausage. The modern equivalent is us joking about what's in hot dogs, right? So, I mean, there's the most lighthearted take I can give you on it. All right. Now, the next one comes to us from a Scottish book. Let me just get it up. There we are. Has a bit of an unusual name for the English tongue, so prep yourself here. Jump Store, I agree. Even saying it felt weird. Healthily is a weird word. This is called the Milk White Dew. And I'll let us all have a chuckle about that, but the truth is it's about a bird. Now, I might be alone in this. We'll see how you feel about this. But this story seems to try to put a situation together where, like, there's a happy ending, and somehow that makes it creepier to me. Jumpstore says, as a Jewish person, I would only have eaten the sausage knowing it wasn't made from pig. Is human kosher, though? I mean, I ask that somewhat genuinely. I genuinely don't know. Okay. I'm sure, though, having spent some time reading through some literature about topics like that, I'm sure someone's discussed it. All right. So this one tries to be a happier tale, and I just don't think it can get past the grimness of its premise. But maybe you'll disagree. Our next story, a terrible, horrible story, comes to us from the Scottish Fairy Book. It's called The Milk White Dew, which is a bird, in case you're already running away with it. Yeah, it's also a horrible story about cannibalism. There was once a man who got his living by working in the fields. He had one little son called Curly Locks, and one little daughter called Golden Tresses. But his wife was dead, and as he had to be out all day, these children were often left alone. So as he was afraid that some evil might befall them when there was no one to look after them, he, in an ill day, married again. Dun dun dun. We all know that forebodes in folklore. I say, in an ill day, for his second wife was a most deceitful woman who really hated children. Although she pretended, before her marriage, to love them, and she was so unkind to them and made the house so uncomfortable with her bad temper that her poor husband often sighed to himself and wished that he had let well alone and remained a widower. But it was no use crying over spilt milk. The deed was done, and he had just to try to make the best of it. So things went on for several years until the children were beginning to run about the doors and play by themselves. And then one day the good man chanced to catch a hare, and he brought it home, and he gave it to his wife to cook for the dinner. Now his wife was a very good cook. She made him the hare into a pot of delicious soup. But she was also greedy. And while the pot was boiling, she tasted it till at last she discovered that it was almost done. Then she was in a fine state of mind, for she knew that her husband would be coming home for his dinner and that he would have nothing to set before him. So what do you think the wicked woman did? The one downside, I'll just say, to me, to making all these stories about this topic, is I think you always know what the twist is. She went out to the door where her little stepson Curly Locks was playing in the sun and told him to come in, get his face washed. While he was washing his face, she struck him on the head with a hammer and stunned him, popped him into the pot to make soup for his father's dinner. By and by, the good man came in from his work, and the soup was dished up, and he and his wife and his little daughter, Golden Tresses, sat down to sup it. "Where's Curly Locks?" asked the goodman. "It's a pity he's not here as long as the soup is hot." How should I ken? Answered his wife crossly. I've other work to do other than to run after a mischievous laddie all the morning. The goodman went on supping his soup in silence for some minutes, and then he lifted up a little foot in his spoon. This is Curlylock's foot, he cried in horror. There has been ill work here. Oh, it's havers, answered his wife, laughing, pretending to be very much amused. What should Curlylock's foot be doing in the soup? 'Tis the hare's forefoot, which is very like that of a bairn. Again, bairn is child. It's a Scottish word. There's a picture of the horrible meal. But presently the goodman took something else up in his spoon. This is Curlylock's hand, he said shrilly. I ken it by the crook in his little finger. The man's a demented, retorted his wife, not to ken the hind foot of a hare when he sees it. So the poor father did not say any more, but went away out to his work, sorely perplexed in his mind, while his little daughter Golden Tresses, who had a shrewd suspicion of what had happened, gathered all the bones from the empty plates, and carrying them away in her apron, buried them beneath a flat stone, close by a white rose tree that grew by the cottage door. And lo and behold, those poor bones, which she buried with such care, grew and grew to a milk-white dew that took its wings and away it flew. And at last it lighted on a tuft of grass by a burnside, where two women were washing clothes, and it sat there cooing to itself for some time, and then it sang this song softly to them. Pew, pew, my mimmy me. I need some water. My throat's catching. My mimmy me slew, my daddy me chew, my sister gathered my bones, and put them between two milk-white stones, and they grew and grew to a milk-white dew, and I took to my wings and away I flew. Then the women stopped washing and looked at one another in astonishment. It's not every day that they came across a bird that could sing a song like that. And they felt that there was something not canny about it. Sing that song again, my bonny bird, said one of them at last, and we'll give you all these clothes. So the bird sang the song over again, and the washerwoman gave it all the clothes, and it tucked them under its right wing and flew on. Probably can't see this very well, but it's a picture of a milk-white dew singing to a sleeping man at a desk with a writing quill. Presently it came to a house where all the windows were open, and it perched on one of the window sills. And inside it saw a man counting out a great heap of silver. And sitting on the window sill, it sang its song to him. Pew, pew, my mimmy me slew, my daddy me chew, my sister gathered me bones, and put them between two milk-white stones, and I grew and grew to a milk-white dew, and I took to my wings and away I flew. The man stopped counting his silver and listened. He felt like the washerwoman. That there was something not uncanny about this dew, and when it had finished its song, he said, Sing that song again, my bonny bird. I give thee this siller in a bag. So the dew sang its song over again and got the bag of silver, which it tucked under its left wing, and then flew on. It had not flown very far, however, before it came to a mill where two millers were grinding corn, and it settled down on a sack of meal and sang its song to them. Pew, pew, my mimmy me slew, my daddy me chew, my sister gathered me bones, and put them between two milk-white stones, and I grew and grew to a milk-white dew, and I took to my wings and away I flew. And the millers stopped their work and looked at one another and scratching their heads in amazement. Sing that song over again, my bonny bird, exclaimed both of them together when the Dew had finished. "And we'll give thee this millstone," which is a hell of a gift, by the way. And so the Dew repeated its song and got the millstone, which it asked one of the millers to lift on its back, and then it flew out of the mill and up to the valley, leaving the two men staring after it dumb with astonishment. I should, but I do need to point out that this bird is currently carrying a bunch of clothes, a sack of grain, and not a sack of grain, a sack of silver, and a milling stone on it, and it's basically a pigeon. As you may think, the milk-white Dew had a heavy load to carry, but it went bravely on till it came within sight of its father's cottage, and lighted down at last on the thatched roof. Then it laid its burdens on the thatch, and flying down to the courtyard picked up a number of little chucky stones, and with them in its beak it flew back to the roof and began to throw them down the chimney. By the time it was evening, and the goodman and his wife and his little daughter, Golden Tresses, were sitting round the table eating their supper, you may be sure they were all very much startled when the stones came rattling down the chimney, bringing such a cloud of soot with them that they were like to be smothered. They all jumped up from their chairs and ran outside to see what the matter was. And then it spread its wings and flew away, and And Golden Tresses, being the littlest, ran the fastest. And when she came out the door, the milk-white Dew flung the bundle of clothes down at her feet. And the father came out next, and the milk-white Dew flung the bag of silver down to his feet. But the wicked stepmother, being somewhat stout, came out last, and the milk-white Dew threw the millstone right down on her head and killed her. And then it spread its wings and flew away, and has never been seen again. But it made the good man and his daughter rich for life, and it had rid them of the cruel stepmother, so that they lived in peace and plenty for the remainder of their days. They still ate them, though, so, this isn't a happy ending. Jumpstore said the juniper tree just called and wants to know where to file their plagiarism forms. No kidding. We're going to get, plagiarism might not be the right word, but we're going to see some of the trends in these tales coming out. The one that stands out about the first one that I forgot to say, the Child Eater, is, first of all, it just reeks of a real story. I'll say that much. It seems real. But it's also very similar to, well, it's not very similar, but it reminds me a little bit of, I'm having a hard time recalling the name. I did a video with my friend Joseph Gego Wanaganasam about it once, who's a Cree man. It's the mother cannibal who eats her own children in the winter story that is in native circles. Chad will know the name. It's a very famous name. It's weird I've forgotten it. Lizzie Rose says, I noticed the last story was basically the juniper tree too. Yeah, it was just more cannibalism than I remember the juniper tree having. All right. I won't get myself too distracted, though. Let's get on to the Norwegian tale next. Or does that? Now I'm starting. What has honestly happened is I was in my head. I was like, the juniper tree doesn't have. It is like that, but it doesn't have cannibalism. And now I'm trying to remember. Did it? Did I forget that it had cannibalism? I'm sure you'll let me know in chat if I did. The title is revealing of what this story's about. And I appreciate that. This was the story that, I will just briefly say this. This story is translated by Simon Roy Hughes. It was from the collections of this Bjornson and Moe, who have read many many, many times. Oh, GS says it did have cannibalism. Did it? Why do I not remember the cannibalism? That's very strange. Anyways, though as Bjornsson and Moe chose to leave it out of their Norwegian folktale collections, because as the quote I said in the beginning of the stream said, they found it to be a story, a reprehensible and disgusting story that had no redeeming qualities. And they might be right. It's similar in nature to our other sausage story, though not quite the same. But very similar, because a lot of these tales, they spread around and change, and that's always been interesting to me. But I do want to remind you, well, I'll do it in the intro here. Our next tale is called The Parson Sausage, so I think you probably know where this is going. It comes to us from Simon Roy Hughes, who is a translator of Norwegian folklore. Specifically, he very recently published annotated complete collections of Asbjornsen and Moe's works, Norwegian folktales work, which you can get in physical or digital copies on Amazon. And hopefully I'll remember to leave those links down below. You should get them. They are the most complete and best versions of that particular collection that's ever been made. And one of the things that he included in it, in the name of completion, is Parson Sausage, which was something that Asbjornsen and Moe were going to include initially, and then decided it had no redeeming qualities and didn't. So even the original copy doesn't have this, but Simon Roy Hughes one does, which is why you should buy it. There was once upon a time a girl who'd been allowed to go to church to attend Mass. But she lived away in the forest, and the church road was so long that she had to leave home early on Saturday. She walked and walked, but however she walked, she did not arrive. She had trodden on mat grass. She walked and she ran, but she didn't find the church, nor did she come to folk until late in the evening. And then she came to a cabin far, far away in the forest. A light shone from the window, and a woman went about inside, cooking and tidying. So the girl went in and asked for a place to stay. "God help me! What a house this is! I cannot let you stay," said the woman. "I cannot! It would be better to stay beneath the sky in the forest than to stay here." She said, "Here dwell 12 robbers. They are my sons. If they see you, they will kill you on the spot." But the girl said it was better to have a roof over her head, no matter how wrong, than to be out beneath the night sky in the forest. Well, then she would be allowed to say. Still saying it? There we go. Don't know that I agree with her reasoning there. When they heard the robbers coming, the woman hid her as well as she could in a corner behind some clutter which lay there. Then out came all 12 faring, and between them they had the parson in his parson's cassock and in full church splendor. They laid him on a bench and stabbed him in his throat with a butcher's knife, butchered him like any other pig, hung him up by his hind legs. They put his blood in a butcher's pail, made sausages from it, and cooked and roasted and ate well enough. The girl did not feel very brave, and she did not think that her life was worth many shillings there where she lay. But when they had eaten their fill, they settled down, the robbers did, and early on Sunday morning, the woman woke the girl and put her on the right path and gave her some sausages for food along the way and bade her hurry so that the robbers wouldn't take her. But that was something she needn't bid her, for the girl ran as quickly as she could, and then some. And when the day began to dawn in the forest, she glimpsed the church Then she heard a rumbling. The robbers were after her, wanted to catch her. So she flew from the wilderness as she'd intended, and when she saw the congregation standing on the church hill waiting for the parson, she swung the sausages in the air, crying, "Parson sausage! Parson sausage!" Then the congregation understood what had become of the parson, and so they immediately took the robbers. Some they beat, and some they hanged, and some they rolled in nail barrels. They caught 11, but the 12th escaped, and he walks and crawls and skulks. And if you aren't very good, he'll leap down across all the hills and take you. There he is. Jump sort of talking about, I don't know, who doesn't see anything inherently wrong with cannibalism. I mean, there's a few different angles there, but I think GS summarizes it. It's just sort of an instinct that species mostly have about each other outside of desperation. But in these stories, you know, it's like loved ones and innocent people being murdered. I love the idea that no further explanation was needed. Parson sausage made perfect sense to them. Which makes you wonder, like, is this a thing that happened a lot? All right. Well, this went quicker than I expected. The last one is the least gruesome, I guess. It's the most thin on the idea of it's the most thin on the idea of cannibalism, I will say. I think it fits well enough, but I also wanted something that wasn't too rough to finish out the stream on. So, that's why I kind of went with this one. This one is a Breton or a Brittany folklore. That just sketched my brain. There actually was one other story, but it didn't get translated in time. As a little like bonus here, I'll mention it. I believe it was Jurgen who told me it. I believe it was German. I'm going to give you my best rendition of it, although if at some point he does translate it, I will probably just read it, that version as well. The story goes that a fellow was having a chest-sitting spirit. There's like 50 different names for these things, but a chest-sitting spirit being the kind of spirit who would lurk into your room at night, sit upon your chest and stare at you. Often accompanied by feelings of paralysis and suffocation. Now there are sort of modern medical reasons why this happens, but the chest-sitting spirit, of course, was a pretty persistent piece of folklore the world over. There's one in Japan, there's one in China, there's one in many different areas of Europe. Anyhow, he was asking what to do about this fellow who had this chest-sitting spirit, what to do about this spirit that was tormenting him. And so he is told that he needs to sit up in the night when they're coming and tell her to go away, or something to that effect. Apologies. I only read it briefly once, and what I read was a paraphrasing. And so when he does that, when his door opens and the spirit comes and whatever else, she falls down, I believe, or disappears or something to that effect. Or actually, maybe he doesn't see her at all when he says it. But nonetheless, what does appear on his bed is an apple. And so he eats the apple and goes back to sleep. When he awakens the next morning, he discovers on the floor next to his bed the skeleton of a witch, whose bones are still sticky with meat, and marked by teeth marks. Let me have some tea and read you a story of light, more implied cannibalism. Our last tale tonight is probably the least harrowing on the topic, and it is called The Water Witch. It comes to us from popular legends of Brittany, which I've talked many times about where Brittany is. It's in northwest France, modern-day France, I should say, but it is a distinct culture that reaches pretty far back into history of the Breton people. And this is folklore from that culture. It's about a witch, and kind of very slightly about cannibalism. Just a little bit. A long time ago, there lived a young peasant called William, and a pretty young maiden who was named Bella. They loved each other dearly, and would have gladly have married, but they were poor, and were forced to go out to do service for a living. One day, William said to Bella, "I've driven these cows into the village for the last time. I cannot succeed here. So tomorrow I'm going to the wide world to see if I can meet with luck anywhere." Well, Bella wept. But William was not to be turned from his purpose. He consoled his betrothed as well he could. Promised to return soon. "Now then," said Bella, "since it must be so. But first we will share with each other 3 valuables which my father left behind at his death." So she went to the closet, brought out a little bell, a knife, and a staff. "These 3 things have never been out of our family," said she. "The little bell has the gift of notifying by its clear ring the friends of the possessor whenever he is in danger. The knife has the power of freeing from enchantment whatever it touches, and the staff guides one wherever he wishes to go. I will give you the little bell and the knife, and the staff I shall keep myself." Well, William thanked her, bade her farewell. Bella looked after him with tearful eyes till he disappeared behind the mountains. William, in the course of a few days, came to a town in the vicinity of a lake. He sat down before the door of an inn, and he overheard 2 ass drivers talking about the Water Witch on the island in the lake. William inquired who she was, and he was told that she was a fairy who lived on the island in the lake nearby. She was richer than all the kings together. Many people had gone thither to get possession of her treasure, but no one had ever returned. Well, William could not get this story out of his head. He made up his mind to go to the Water Witch, to see if he could not get enough from her to buy a cow and a poor little pig. When the ass drivers heard this, they cried out with horror, and they tried to keep him back, but William was a little more than self-willed. He set off to the lake, and there he met a ferryman, took him over to the island. Just gonna have a drink of tea here. Sorry about that. In the center of the island, there was a large pond, wholly covered with water lilies in full flower. In this pond lived the Water Witch. William walked around the pond and discovered in the rushes a boat in the shape of a sleeping swan with its head under its wing. This, William thought, was very remarkable. Had never seen anything like it before. He climbed into the boat in order to examine it more thoroughly, but his feet had no sooner touched the bottom of the boat than the swan seemed to awake, raised its head from beneath its wings, and rowing with its broad webbed feet, swam swiftly away from the shore. Well, William uttered a cry of horror, but the swan still swam on, till the young man sprang into the water to make his escape. The swan dipped under and caught him up again and drew him down with her to the bottom of the pond. William was obliged to hold his peace to keep from swallowing more water than was agreeable. I love the way folklore understates things. In this manner he was brought to the dwelling of the Water Witch. This was a place of rare beauty, built entirely out of mussel shells. A crystal staircase led to it, and every step of which gave out a musical tone as soon as a foot touched it. Mwah! Wonderful detail. Steal that and put it in modern fiction, my God. The palace was surrounded on all sides by wide-spreading gardens containing forests of marine plants and meadows of seaweed, where in place of flowers glittered the purest diamonds. The Water Witch was reclining in the first apartment of the palace on a golden sofa. She was dressed in sea-green silk. Her long black hair, intertwined with coral, reached down to her feet, and her face was of that delicate red and white which distinguishes the inner surface of the mussel shell. The young man, dazzled by her beauty, stood as if entranced, but the Water Witch rose from her couch, kindly inquired who he was, bade him welcome. She conducted him into a second apartment, which was built entirely of pearl. She placed before him 8 golden beakers with 8 different kinds of wine. William drank. He'd never tasted anything so delicious, and he was perfectly charmed with the fascinating Water Witch. Then she showed him her countless treasures and told him that all the precious things that fell into the sea she managed to get into her possession by means of her magical arts. William was astonished. The wine made him feel very happy. And he said, "Well, one who is so very rich is much to be envied. If only I had 1,000th part of these great riches, I should be content." "Ooh, half of them shall be yours if you wish," said the Water Witch. "Remain with me. I shall be your wife. Then you can be master of everything you desire." The 8 different kinds of wine were whirling in William's head. He forgot his promise to Bella, and he accepted the proposal of the Water Witch without the least hesitation. Great! The Water Witch immediately commenced preparing a delicious repast. She betook herself to a fish tank in the garden and called out, "Holla the miller! Holla the tailor! Holla the clerk!" and so on, and at each cry a little fish came swimming towards her, which she caught in a steel net until her net was full. Then she went into a room adjoining the eating room, put the fish into a golden pan, and began to fry them. It seemed to William as if he had heard the fish sob while they were frying. "What is that sighing in the golden pan?" he asked. "It is the wood singing," said the Water Witch. After a little while, voices began to whisper. "What is that whispering here?" he asked. "The fat hissing in the pan," she answered. But now those little voices cried out audibly and loud. "What is that cry?" said William. "Those are the crickets in the hearth," said the Water Witch. She immediately began to sing so loud that he could hear nothing more. "Oh, da, 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 just cooking a normal fish." Still, what he had heard. I've done this for 3 years, and this is what trips me up. Still, what he had heard inspired him somehow with terror. And as he began to fear for himself, he began to reproach himself to his frivolity. And he thought of his dear Bella, but the Water Witch brought him the fried fish, begged him to eat. and went to fetch 12 different kinds of wine. William drew his knife out of his pocket and was about to commence operations, but hardly had he touched the golden dish with the knife which Bella had given him than the spell of the enchantment was broken. The fishes rose up and became little men. One was a miller with a meal-gray coat, the other a tailor with a blue hose, and blue Jose, I guess. The other a chapel clerk with long flowing robes, and all cried out together, "William, save us, if you would be saved yourself." William was astounded. "Pray, who are these little people?" he cried out. "We are men like yourself," they answered. "We came here to get rich, but the day came after our marriage to the water witch. She changed us into fishes and threw us into the great fish tank." "Alas!" cried William, struck aghast. "Has the water witch had so many husbands already? And now they're all fishes?" "You also soon will be a fish yourself, and will be eaten up by the first newcomer," said the little creatures. William gave a spring. He seemed to feel himself already frying in the golden pan, and he was fain to make his escape before the water witch returned. But she met him at the door. She'd heard all. She touched him with her wire net and changed him into a frog and threw him into the tank. At this moment, the little bell which he wore around his neck, gifted by Bella, was rung. And Bella heard the sound, as was its trick, though she was very, very far away. It went to her very heart, and she uttered a cry of anguish and said, "William is in danger." Without a moment's consideration or stopping to inquire of anyone, she put on her shoes and her Sunday suit, hung her little silver cross across her neck, and staff in hand she left the house. She went to a crossway, and there she stuck the staff in the ground and said, little staff, hear me. Little staff, bear me. Over stone and stump, over copse and clump, over the river and over the sea, far away through the air, little staff, carry me." And the staff instantly changed into a saddle horse, all nicely groomed, saddled and bridled, with a blue plume on its forehead and a fluttering ribbon behind each ear. Well, Bella mounted the horse without delay, and it started first on a walk, then a trot, then a gallop, and at last it went so swiftly that ditches and trees and houses and towers flew by her like arms of a windmill. But still it did not go fast enough for Bella, and she urged him on, saying, "The swallow is swifter than the horse, and the wind is swifter than the swallow. The lightning is swifter than the wind, but my little horse, if you love me, fly swifter than them all." And when the horse heard this, he flew as swift as a thought, and in a moment he was at the foot of a high rock called Deer's Leap, which was so steep and high he could not get over it, but Bella knew very well what to do. And she immediately began to cry, little horse, hear me. Little horse, bear me over stone and stump, over copse and clump, over the river and over the sea, far away through the air. Little horse, carry me." And she had hardly pronounced the words when huge wings came out of the horse's sides, and it changed into an eagle, which brought Bella up to the top of the rocks, and there she stopped, and Bella espied a great nest in which sat a little black crippled dwarf. The dwarf uttered a loud cry when he saw Bella. "Dear maiden," he cried, "save me, save me!" "Save you?" cried Bella. "Who are you, pray, my dear little man?" "I am the husband of the water witch who has enchanted me here. Because I could not endure her witchcraft, and now I am condemned to sit here till somebody frees me, till I've hatched out these stone eggs." Well, Bella began to laugh aloud. "Oh, my little setting hen, how can I set you free? If you rescue William, who is in the power of the water witch." Sorry, this is the book that has kind of a messed up scan to it. I don't know what the end of that sentence is, but anyways, Bella did not wait to hear that a second time. "Quick, what must I do?" "There are two things that must be done," replied the dwarf. "You must dress yourself like a man so that the water witch may not recognize you, and then you must snatch away the wire net which she wears at her girdle and imprison her in it forever." "But I have no men's clothing," said Bella. "We'll soon help you then." "To them," answered the little man, and he tore out 4 of his little red hairs. He murmured softly a few words, blew hairs into the air, and they instantly turned into 4 tailors, one of whom bore a cabbage head, a second a pair of shears, a third a needle, and the fourth a tailor's goose. Bet you thought they were going to be clothes, but no. They quickly seated themselves around the nest, crossed their legs, and began to make an entire man's suit for Bella. Out of the cabbage leaf they made a beautiful coat. Out of the second, a long vest. 2 others gave the flowing trousers, and the heart served for a hat, and the stump for the shoes. Bella looked in her new dress like a nobleman. She received a few more directions from the little man, mounted her eagle, and betook herself to the island of the Water Witch. Here she changed the eagle into a walking staff, and suffered herself to be brought by the swan to the dwelling of the Water Witch. The Water Witch did not recognize Bella, and at the sight of the young man in silk and satin, she was greatly delighted. She brought Bella into the pearl room and served her with wine. Bella found William's knife on the table, and she stuck it into her girdle. Then she went with the Water Witch to walk in the garden, and they both stood beside the fish tank. Bella leaned over the little fishes, wholly beside herself with delight, and when the Water Witch invited her to remain with her, she said, "Yes, if you will permit me to fish a little in the tank." While the Water Witch suspected no harm. That's my woman pretending to be a man voice while being a man myself. And they both stood beside the Water Witch suspected no harm. She gave her the net which hung from her girdle and said, laughing, "Now let's see what you will catch." And Bella threw that net over the Water Witch with a cry of joy. "Infamous witch! Become an appearance which you are in heart." And the Water Witch shrieked, but soon she was silenced, for in a few minutes she changed into an odious mushroom. And Bella drew the net close together over the mushroom and threw it into a deep well, which she filled up with heavy stones. Then she hastened back to the fish tank, but the fish were already come up out of the water, and in a long procession they were wriggling along in an upright position towards Bella, crying out, "That is the nobleman who rescued us from the steel net and the golden frying pan." Bella took the knife in her hand. She had observed close at her feet a frog who wore a little bell around his neck, sighed heavily, and pressed his 2 front claws upon his heart. That's a cute image. She touched him with the knife, and the frog turned into a man who was no one else than William. And then she touched the fishes, and they immediately changed back to what they were before. And when she'd done all this, the little man from Deer's Leap made his appearance. He sat in his nest as in a carriage, and the 6 stone egg shad had been changed into as many beetles and were drawing the carriage. He thanked Bella 1,000 times and led her and William to the treasure chamber, which was filled entirely with gold and precious stones, and both filled pockets, hats, and handkerchiefs brimful. Then Bella changed her staff into a winged carriage, which was large enough to hold them both, and which took them back to their native village. Now they could get married, but instead of a little cow and a poor little pig, William bought all the land there that was to be sold, and all the cattle and horses and sheep and goats there were to be had, and they built a splendid house, and they lived a long life in happiness and peace. Well, I'm sorry that I missed Zombie Wolf dropping in. I'm also sorry to hear that Zombie Wolf won't be able to be here live. But I mean, we all have lives to live, I suppose. Work being most of it. You'll be in good company with Uncle Kitty in the comments. who does hope to be back soon, but of course, none of us really controls that. GS says the writers must have been high. Cabbage Head, where did they get these ideas? Jumpstore says, I always wonder how these heroes avoid getting audited. Well, I mean, they have magic knives and stuff. Maybe nobody wants to mess with them. GS says that was a change of tone. That is intentional, because that is officially the last Hallowstream of the year. We will not be doing more stuff like this. I don't know if I'll be doing more streams this week or next. I mean, obviously, if I do, you'll see them. But I'll be honest, I'm a little tired. There was a bunch of stuff going on outside of the stream during October. Again, good stuff, but it sucked a bunch of energy out of me. The other reason is I don't really know what to read in the first 2 weeks of November, if I'm being completely honest. It's a weird, like, null zone between Halloween and Christmas stuff. And I do really like Christmas, unironically. I know that it's cool not to. I should say Christmas time. Like the midwinter feast. Whatever you want to make of it. This is the end of it. The Hallowstreams, and we'll see how I feel. If I find something I really want to do, then I'll be here Thursday. If not, then hopefully nobody is really burned by it. Jumpstore says Native American folklore. Yeah, so I don't really do cultures that are too removed from my own, because I don't feel like I can do it justice. But if you do want to hear a little bit of that, it's very old. It's back in like 2021, the end of September. I did a Fireside Fairy Tale, as I mentioned, with Joseph Gagawinaganessim, who is the author of My Indian Summer, which is an excellent book. I do recommend. But a friend of mine, I went over to his house and I interviewed him. And he told a couple of tales. It was mostly an interview, but he told a couple of tales, if you want that. Anyhow. But that's just so people don't, like, panic or whatever else. It's just a weird little null space in the beginning of November. I also have had an idea for a story that I wanted to write for a while. I don't know if you'll like it, Jumpstore, the book, but it was kind of aimed at, like, a high school audience trying to do, as he put it, what did he say? He said The Outsiders is too old. There needs to be a more modern story or something to that effect. But it is an excellent story. I will say it started as nonfiction, and then later he decided to sort of turn it into more of a fiction story. I won't go into too much detail of that, but I will say a lot of it is nonfiction. Anyways, it's an excellent book. If you guys do read it, by the way, something I haven't done in a long time, but I keep trying to get going, is I have a very rarely done thing where I do a book club with Avalon Born, which is on the channel, called Big Van Book Club, where we read Vancouver authors a certain amount, and then we would come and discuss it on stream for a while, sort of like a podcast. We did go through that book, but I haven't done it in a while because it was a lot of energy I didn't have. Though she does send me books, and I do intend to do it again. Anyways, I am reaching the point where I'm babbling. Smudge is yelling at me because he's hungry. I will just wrap it there. Thank you everybody who enjoyed the Hallowstreams. If you didn't enjoy the Hallowstreams, that's okay. We're moving on to cheerful stories. I will say it's much easier to find Hallowstream stories than it is Christmas folklore. So we'll see what I can find this year. I see what you did there, Jumpstore. Tammy, thank you for the compliment on the voices. I hope that your surgery feels better. Zombie Wolf, I hope those extra hours or different hours don't wear on you too hard. Jumpstore, thank you very much. And Lizzie Rose and Genera, thank you so much for watching, and everybody out there lurking, of course. As always, I'll keep the fire going. You folks have a lovely evening. And hey, we're into winter proper now, so here's a different outro.